Hello, my name is Scott Nichol, and this presentation is intended for an audience of educational leaders who see the value in applying neuroscience principles in educational contexts and wish to create optimal working environments for their staff that support their professional development. To provide you with this information, today I will cover the following. What conditions in the working environment must leaders create to support staff in performing optimally? Which of these conditions are particularly important in relation to staff's professional development? And how can we effectively create these conditions in our educational environments, looking at examples of best practice in schools? All of this will be explored through the lens of neuroleadership, which involves research looking into the neuroscience of leadership. So, what conditions need to be created? Well, leaders need to create the conditions to activate in the brain what neuroleadership researchers such as David Rock describe as reward mode. Let's have a look at the brain to understand what this means. When information comes into the brain from the brainstem, it goes through a collection of brain regions known as the limbic system, which has the role of making sure you survive. It was responsible for protecting our ancestors tens of thousands of years ago from predators and ensuring their survival. The sensory information that arrives here initially goes through the thalamus, which relays information to the rest of the brain, and also goes through the amygdala, which is a small brain region involved in emotional responses. The limbic system's role is ensuring survival, and because of this, it is biased towards information which could pose a threat. So much so that the brain scans for threats roughly 4 to 5 times per second, and the brain has around 4 to 5 times the neural circuitry involved in negative compared to positive emotions. When the amygdala detects a perceived threat, it triggers the threat response, involving the release of chemicals in the brain such as cortisol and adrenaline, and behaviors directed towards self preservation. However, if no threats are detected, information can proceed through to the prefrontal cortex for further analysis. This is where our conscious logical thinking takes place in the brain and is known as reward mode, as we are able to use our brains to the best of our ability to think and complete tasks. So, what conditions in the working environments do leaders need to create to trigger the reward mode in their staff? There are many models which outline these conditions, such as David Rock's SCARF model, but perhaps one of the most comprehensive and useful models is Judy Newman's taproot model, based on a significant amount of research involving interviews with hundreds of teachers and educational leaders and refined over time. The model is based on 10 key conditions that have the potential to trigger either the threat or reward mode based on their implementation by leaders. These conditions are appreciation, challenge, pleasure, truth and fairness, choice and control, purpose, and certainty and clarity. As this presentation is specifically focused on staff development, I will focus on the conditions which relate explicitly to this aspect of leadership, which are certainty and clarity, challenge, purpose, and choice and control. So, what do these actually mean, and how do these conditions affect the brain depending on how these manifest in the working condition? Well, certainty and clarity. This means providing staff with clear information about what is expected of them. Demetriadis and Sekogias state certainty and clarity are important for the brain, as any ambiguity means uncertainty, which could mean danger. The brain does not like unknowns. Put simply, certainty and clarity means safety, which activates reward mode. However, feelings of uncertainty means the unknown, which could pose a potential threat and activates threat mode. Although leaders know what they want staff to do, they need to give them clear feedback to achieve this. However, research suggests this is not done in practice. According to one study, 87% of people say they want to improve in their roles, but only a third of people are given the feedback they need to do this. This is not surprising. People find giving and receiving feedback a difficult process. A study by West et al. Found that the heart rates of individuals increased both when giving and receiving feedback. Why is this the case though? Well, our brains are highly social, and as explained, our limbic system is constantly scanning for threats. In the past, our ancestors survived in tribes, as social isolation would have meant certain death. This part of the brain is still sensitive to social threats, situations which have the potential to impact relationships negatively, as this could lead to social isolation. Choice and control. This refers to providing staff with autonomy over meaningful decisions. One study by Bobadilla Suarez, Sunstein, and Sharrow involved participants being given a choice between retaining control and making decisions, or delegating these to someone else. However, if they chose to retain control, they would forfeit some of the monetary rewards on offer. Despite this, many of the participants chose to retain control, suggesting choice itself is intrinsically motivating. This is supported by other research including Liotti and Delgado, and is not surprising given what we have discussed about the brain so far. The brain likes to reduce uncertainty, and by making your own choices rather than allowing others to do so, control is retained. Challenge. This involves providing staff with opportunities to extend their knowledge and skills at an appropriate level. Monotonous tasks which are understimulating or tasks which stretch beyond the capabilities of staff don't create the conditions for challenge, because as Judy Willis discusses, boredom as well as being overwhelmed activates threat mode. In order to activate reward mode, leaders must provide opportunities for development which challenge their staff, but not to the extent they become overwhelmed and threat mode is triggered. As we have mentioned, the majority of people want to improve in their roles, and this is not surprising as the brain is hardwired to seek out learning opportunities. In fact, there are neural networks dedicated to this, referred to by Jack Panksepp as the seeking system, which finds learning pleasurable, and during this process releases dopamine, which is the feel-good chemical. Leaders need to facilitate rather than stifle this primitive desire. Purpose. This involves creating an environment where staff work towards goals which they feel are worthwhile and meaningful. As Judy Willis has discussed in relation to children, when they don't feel learning is relevant or meaningful, they enter threat mode. Adults are no different, and just as we have to find ways of inspiring and motivating children in our classrooms, leaders must do the same for their staff. Simon Sinek, a prominent figure in business who is also an author as well as a speaker, talks about good leadership practice. He says that people respond to feelings and how a goal aligns with their core beliefs, not necessarily the actions required themselves. He goes on to explain this using his golden circle theory, emphasizing the importance of explaining the why in everything leaders do, as only then will people listen to what you want them to do and how you will do it in order to reach your overall goal. So, this seems straightforward on paper, but how can leaders achieve this in practice? How can leaders achieve purpose when everyone has their own beliefs? How can leaders set expectations without compromising choice? These are all reasonable questions, and the reality is that even without these explanations, these would likely have been identified as common sense through your experiences. Whilst it is nice to know the why of all these, and know that your goal of achieving these is a reasonable one, the reality is that the application is where it matters. So let's look at one model which encompasses all of these conditions and has the added benefit of promoting staff to apply neuroscience as well as other educational research in their classrooms. Essentially, neuroscience to support teachers and using neuroscience to support learners. Sounds like a win-win, doesn't it? Well, in 2007, a school in the United States called St. Andrew's Episcopal School had a vision. The senior leadership saw the potential for educational neuroscience to support their learners, so they began their mission to educate 100% of their teaching staff in the basics of neuroscience and create a culture of action research where teachers were empowered to work together to identify problems in their classrooms, research this issue, and apply findings and principles to make improvements. Whilst the effectiveness of this plan on student outcomes is remarkable, and I encourage you to check out their journey, as well as the training courses and resources available for staff and pupils, what was more remarkable was the buy-in and rollout of this vision so that every teacher bought into it. In an educational world of different beliefs and new initiatives that come and go, how did they manage to achieve and sustain this? Well, even if neuro leadership was not a driving force, the conditions we have discussed today were all embedded in this approach. To begin with, they set out their vision, teaching the basics of neuroscience and showing examples of how this could support students. This provided staff with their purpose. It wasn't a step-by-step guide rolled out by the government, it was a shared vision, a goal to provide the best outcomes for students, a purpose all teachers should get behind. Next, they taught staff how to complete action research, guiding them every step of the way, and even had a member of staff overseeing this, providing the necessary support and guidance. This provided certainty and clarity. Everyone can have a vision, but the staff needed to know how to achieve this. Next, the staff were made the driving force behind the changes. They all followed the same process of action research, whether individually or in groups, but their focus on what to improve in their own classrooms and across the school was their choice. They were given the tools to succeed, but the autonomy to choose what direction they went in. This provided choice and control. Finally, through this process, teachers improved their knowledge and practice, developing professionally. This provided challenge. So, what are the key messages from this presentation? Well, leaders must create a working environment that activates the reward mode in their staff, considering the taproot factors. Certainty and clarity, choice and control, challenge, and purpose are particularly important in supporting your team's professional development. And finally, leaders should consider adopting a similar approach to St. Andrews, providing staff with a purpose, providing a plan to achieve this, and supporting staff as they are given autonomy in achieving this plan. Explaining the why and how of your vision, but provide choice regarding what staff do to achieve this. Now, the ball is in your court. Do you want to be a leader that inspires your staff and creates a brain-friendly environment for them to work in and grow, in turn supporting their learners to reach their potential? If so, now is the time for reflection and action. I would encourage you to review the information covered here today in greater depth, looking into the taproot conditions for optimal working environments and the journey of St Andrews. After that, be the change you want to see and lead with neuroscience in mind. I can guarantee the brain of your staff and pupils will thank you. Thank you for listening.